Welcome. It's edition number 3 of the Parleh Sports Betting Show with Jorey Middlestadt. That's me. And Harley Redlick. He's the other bald guy if you're seeing this on video. And we're with you each and every week on Canada's sports betting network, otherwise known as the Parlay. We want to hear from you always. So you can email us questions@theparlay.com. You can tweet at either one of us. I'm at Jorey Middle. Jorey is Jorey. Sorry, have to do it, Harley. Harley's is much easier at Sharp Edge Picks. And we're calling this a Championship Sunday edition of the program, Harley. It's, for many, the best Sunday of the year when it comes to the NFL. I tend to feel that way. Super Bowl's great and everything, but you get 2 for the price of 1, so to speak, on Championship Sunday. On the show today, we will handicap both games in depth. There will be picks on both games of some sort, but our topic or betting concept of the week are parlays. Fitting, obviously, as the name of the network we're on, the Parlay is a nice Canadian play on words. We're going to talk about parlays today, including same game parlays, and we're calling another audible. We seem to be doing this each and every week, Harley. We were going to talk about bankroll management this week, but next week, with the NFL being on the bye week between the championship games and the Super Bowl, we're going to lay that over until next week. We'll also have a gambling story of the week later on. We're going to talk again about the Aussie Open, as both the men's and the ladies finals are now set. And there's a couple of big favorites, especially on the women's side. We'll also talk a little bit about a gambling story that caught our attention. We're going to try and keep our eye on things like that each and every week and pass those along, as they are important as the sports betting landscape changes in Canada by the day. But first, I think we'd be remiss, even though we're recording on a Friday morning, right, Harley? So there's been all week for people to chime in on what happened a week ago. Arguably one of the best, if not the best, divisional rounds certainly in recent memory in the NFL playoffs. We do want to look back just a little bit, because it was so crazy, capped by the Chiefs and the Bills game, which was off the charts nuts. Right?
Yeah. Saturday's 2 games were very, very good, close, exciting matchups with upsets and underdogs, and nothing in NFL history compared to what we saw in those 2 games Sunday. The Rams fumbleitis blowing a big lead, and everybody willing to bet their life Brady was going to somehow pull it off, and then he doesn't. And then the Bills with 13 seconds to add to wide right and Music City Miracle in their
the cursed Bills. The cursed Bills. First, I want to point out that you had a good week again, coming off a 2-0 wild card weekend with your picks. You were 2-1 and 13 seconds away from 3-0. So you had the Bengals plus the points. You had the Rams and the Bills on the money line. And so even keeping, looking at just the 2 money line bets, by splitting, you still end up winning money because you had both as money line underdogs, right? And that's important to point out. So let's just get some quick thoughts on each game. But before I do that, I want to ask just a simple question that I want to point out for the listeners regarding the NFL. Actually, I'll pose a general question. Of the major professional sports, which is by far the hardest to handicap and make money at?
Historically, it has been the NFL, or it's been viewed as the NFL, just because the markets are efficient, both because they're so large and because you're only playing a game once a week. So there's a lot more information that everybody could pour over. I've had a lot of success in my life betting baseball. The reason you have success playing baseball is because every night at midnight, line makers have to come up with new lines for the next games, the next day. Everybody's playing every day. Rosters change daily. In the NFL, Brady plays every game. Trout takes days off. Pitching matters tremendously in baseball, and that switches around. Again, the key to successful value betting is you pick and choose your spots. You can look at 50 or 100 games in a day across the major sports and some of the minor sports and pick your favorite one or two to handicap and bet on. And volume is the key. The NFL being once a week is relatively efficient. And while it's really fun to bet on, for serious value bettors, it's a challenge.
Yeah, I wanted to point that out because, excuse me, a lot of the time you can handicap a game in the NFL a lot of the time. And I think there's a couple of examples of that this weekend, and it really doesn't matter. The lines are so sharp, and the randomness of football, in particular the NFL, is so nuts that it is the hardest to handicap and make money on a consistent basis. And remember, as you go back to our first show, we talk about 52.4% is your break even, right? When you're betting point spreads and basic 20-cent lines, right? Minus 110 on each side, the favorite and the underdog. It's so difficult. So I bring that up because the most obvious example from last weekend is the Bills and the Chiefs, which we'll come back to, because if you're going to sit here and throw your ticket and jump and say how great you are because you had the Chiefs in that game, I mean, really? F off, right? I mean, that game, there as it turns out, right, there was no handicapping, like either side was the right side. Would you not agree with that?
100%. I mean,
Right.
in the fourth quarter, it looked like the under was going to come in.
Yeah.
Then the over blew it away. The most important thing for a bettor is if you had the Chiefs, don't think you're smart. And if you had
That's my point.
Bills,
Yeah.
if you had the Bills, don't think, oh, I was unlucky. I mean, there's probably 3 categories you could rate your bets in. The winners where you crushed or you were cruising the whole time, which include if you take a 10-point dog and it's a close game throughout, that's a great handicap.
Yes.
Pat yourself on the back. You did good. There's times where you have a 10-point dog and they're losing 31-0, in which case your bet sucked. And plenty of times where they're close. And the truth is, when you rate a bet close and it comes in close, put it in the middle ground category and acknowledge if you have a ton of bets going in that third middle ground category, you're not handicapping great. Maybe you're getting lucky. Maybe you're not getting lucky. But again, because you're paying juice, all those bets. So everybody who bet the Bills and everybody who bet the Chiefs are in that category. Now, I will say that that's one advantage. If you remember last week on the show, we said we were taking the dogs on the money line because we expected close games. So if you're getting a bunch of close games in that category and you're getting plus 120, life is good. If you're laying minus 110, life is going to slowly grind you down to 0.
And the first 3 games last weekend, all won outright by the underdogs, all by 3 points, and all on a last play field goal. And the Chiefs-Bills game also ended on the last play of the game in overtime. So just some quick thoughts on each game. Let's start. We'll go in order. To me, I told you last week, I know you were on the Bengals. I like the Titans. And I think that the way I handicapped that game was correct. What I couldn't predict, which I guess you have to factor in, is the quarterback of the Titans, Ryan Tannehill, basically shitting the bed. He was the difference in that game, right?
Like
the turnovers were the difference. The Titans were the better team. And I'm sorry, you sack the opposing quarterback 9 times, you should win that game. Not to mention, and I want to ask your opinion on what ended up being a very key play in the game when the Titans, they were down 6-0 early on a couple field goals, right? Tannehill throws a pick on the first play of the game. They hold him to a field goal. Cincinnati gets another field goal. Titans tie it up. I think it was very early in the second quarter at 6.
And
on the extra point, Cincinnati gets a penalty. Tennessee decides, right? They have the option. They decide to take half the distance. So they go from the 2 to the 1 yard line and decide to go for 2. Now, I know all the analytic nerds and the analytic numbers will probably tell you that that was the right move to make. Personally, I thought that was idiotic. You're, I think, less than a minute into the second quarter, right? In a now a 6-all game, that 2 points is like going for 2 to me is inconsequential. You kick the extra point. which has got a much higher success rate than even a play from the 1-yard line, and you take the lead. And as it turned out, as it played out, they would have had a 1-point lead at the end of the game. Potentially, I know there's other things that can happen and other potential 2-point attempts on both sides as the game evolves. But that turned out to be a big play, and I thought it was the wrong decision. And again, I know what the analytics might tell you, but time, situation, and other factors need to be in the thought process. What did you think of Vrabel's decision there to go for 2?
It's 100% correct. And the math nerds are just going to eat everybody alive. I mean, football's just a decade behind baseball. Remember when teams started shifting in baseball and then the odd lefty would hit it down the third baseline, and these geeky broadcasters who are, I mean, it's like us, 50-year-old guys that played baseball 30 years ago are like, they think they're so smart. Everybody shifts now. Everybody's going to follow the analytics for a reason. They just work better than the pea-sized brain of some of these coaches. At the end of the day, with Henry in the backfield from the 1, you're going to score, let's just call it conservatively 60% of the time. The math they just run is 0.6 times 2 points is worth 1.2 points. I appreciate what you're saying, that taking the lead psychologically is maybe worth something and they can factor that in. But early in the second quarter, you don't know what's going to happen later. And it's all about getting as many points in positive value situations as possible. For example, in the first half of NFL games, you are not going to see a team anymore kick field goals from inside the 5-yard line. That's a loss, because if you kick the field goal and then you kick off, the other team gets the ball at the 25. Even if you miss and the other team gets it at its own 3, it's worth about as much as the field goal. And you have the bonus of scoring a touchdown. There's just going to be a new way the NFL is played. Stat geeks like me, who've been praising Belichick for a decade because he was the most aggressive in going for it on 4th down from midfield, knew they were right, knew the meatheads that coach in the NFL, all they care about is the media and protecting their jobs, are worried about what's going to happen. If Vrabel was right, nobody would be talking about it, so he missed it, so it's a conversation. It'll take another 2 to 7 years, somewhere in there, till everybody just accepts it. I mean, Troy Aikman even almost accepted it. He's like, this is the new NFL where people do this.
Yeah.
Like, okay, but you don't get the math. You were just a guy who had a great arm and you throw the ball. That doesn't make you smart or good at math or a good decision maker. This will be the future of the NFL when my son, I mean, your son is already an adult, but when my son is watching football, by the time he hits his 20s, he's going to laugh or tell his kid, do you believe it? When I was a little kid, teams actually thought kicking a field goal from the 2-yard line in the second quarter made sense. How dumb were people back then?
I still think time, situation should play a factor, especially in a playoff game. Personally, I would have kicked the extra point there. Game number 2 was less than exciting. It was tight the whole way. It was intriguing. The snow, the cold, the frozen tundra, blah, blah, blah. Bottom line is the Niners win the game without an offensive or defensive touchdown. As you recall, it was a special teams play. And I think
a special teams blocked field goal. They did 2
early
crazy
too.
plays.
And guess what? What was the Packers' Achilles heel? Obviously, they won 13 games, but in some of the games, special teams was a huge factor, and it ended up being their downfall. And I think the other thing that we found out there, we talked about this, or you did, when the Cowboys lost to the Niners, is the division you play in. And it matters when you're trying to handicap these games, because Green Bay kind of got exposed a little bit. I don't want to say they were a fraud. That's a little bit extreme. But the Niners showed playing in that tough division, and they had a lot of injury issues throughout the year. I mean, they were a good team when they were healthy, and they can certainly play defense. We saw that. And what we saw from the Packers was, aside from Devontae Adams, they don't have a tight end that they can throw to this year. When they lost long hair, I just blanked on his name. And the other receivers just were a non-factor. They're like, yeah, Devontae, you can have your 8 or 9 catches for 80 or 90 yards, no real big plays. And we're fine with that. And the Niners just hung around and got the win at the end with special teams and a great last drive from the much maligned Jimmy G.
Yeah, much maligned. And I mean, later on when we get to why I like the Rams this week, I mean, their defensive line is going to make him look like a frightened child. Again, I told you last week that Ryan Tannehill's mother would admit Joe Burrow's a better quarterback, and Joe Burrow could have lost last week 49-0, and he'd still have a job, and Tannehill's possibly on the block. The NFC West was by far the best division in football all year. I keep on saying it. I'm going to keep on saying it. The Seahawks missed Russell Wilson for half the year, or they might have been a playoff team. The Cardinals had a strong season. Big deal that they got demolished by the Rams. In the playoffs, the 49ers and Rams have gone on the road and beat up on Dallas, Green Bay, and Tampa, or they won in Green Bay. All three other division winners hosted the NFC West and lost. And if you look at the AFC, the truth is the teams from the two best all-around divisions, since he played in a division with Baltimore, Pittsburgh, and Cleveland, all gritty teams. Denver was okay. San Diego or the Chargers, wherever they play now, and the Raiders were both playoff teams / almost playoff teams. And I mean, the Chargers and that Bert are going to be competitive for a lot of years to come. Those are the best divisions in football. And if you're tried and tested, you're playing playoff type games in October and November every week, you're going to dominate come the postseason.
And then came Sunday, which the first game looked like the Rams were just going to cruise. They were the better team. They were certainly dominating with their defensive line. Aaron Donald was wrecking that game. He was in Tom Brady's grill all day. And then, I don't want to say fluky, but I mean, again, turnovers allowed Tampa back into the game. But yes, I was with you. I like the Rams. I didn't have a significant play on it. So just suffice to say, I didn't have any real skin in the game. I was just happy the Rams won because they were the deserving winner. And don't at me or tell me otherwise. If you watch the game, you understand the Rams were the better team. And thank goodness they got the win because they deserved it.
Yeah, they deserved it. Sometimes you don't win just because you deserved it. Their play calling got critiqued more than I thought it should. I mean, at the end of the day, they fumbled a few times. They made some sloppy mistakes. I think they'll be sharper this week.
Cam Akers has to be a little sharper in protecting the ball, right? Fumble on the 1 yard line right before the end of the half. And then that huge fumble when they're basically going to run out the clock. In fact, if he doesn't fumble on that play, I think he gets the first down and the game's over.
He's pretty close to the first down. And I mean,
yeah, and that was a second down.
He deserves a lot of credit for getting 7 yards in a situation where the defense knows he's running the ball up the middle, but he's got to hold on to the ball.
Yeah. So it got a lot more exciting than it should have been. And the fourth quarter of that game, the adjective I used on Twitter was bonkers. And then bonkers doesn't even begin to describe what we saw really in the last 4.5 minutes of the Chiefs-Bills game, which was competitive throughout, but the last 4.5 minutes was just nuts. So very quickly, because we're almost 20 minutes in and we haven't got to the championship games, but I want to get your thoughts on what happened in the last 13 seconds, right? For those who don't know, right? Bills take the lead by 3. They're kicking off with 13 seconds
Jorey,
to go.
If people don't know what happened at the end of the Bills game, they're not listening to this podcast.
True.
There was, but if somebody is listening to what we have to say 5 days later who don't know what happened in the Bills game, I want to meet that person and get to know that person and understand their profile because they are super loyal to us and only us. They don't give a shit about the NFL. They don't even care about sports. They're just people who want to see or listen to bald middle-aged men talking, which is interesting.
I did sum it up in 10 seconds. I did sum it up in 10 seconds. So the first question I have for you is what we know what they did. They kicked for the kickoff, they kicked it through the end zone, give the Chiefs the ball at the 25. What would you have liked to seen happen if something different than what actually did?
Okay, I didn't have a major problem with the 25-yard kickoff. I know in hindsight, everybody says they should have squibbed it. The issue with the squib kick is if your squib kick isn't perfect, a team might end up with the ball at the 37 or 38-yard line. And even if that clock's 5 or 6 seconds, big deal. That's what Mahomes did on the first play. The big problem that Buffalo did And again, the
Well,
analytic
hold
geeks
on.
have been calling on
Yeah, go ahead. I wanted to
the
jump in
big
about the
analytic.
kickoff.
All the analytic geeks have been calling on this for 5 years now. I don't know why NFL coaches haven't clued in. Is all you have to do is hold every receiver at the line of scrimmage on the play, because you get
Okay.
5-yard or 10-yard holding plays, and the clock runs out. And the best Mahomes is going to get is a Hail Mary attempt. So you want to go back
Hold
to
on.
analytics?
I got
gives Mahomes a Hail Mary. That's it.
I gotta jump in. So you actually can only do you can only do that on one play.
Okay.
The holding.
Right.
Deliberate fouls. They actually have put the rule in place a few years ago where if you deliberately foul, especially if it's multiple players, you'll get away with it once. You're allowed once,
Right.
but you can't do it on consecutive plays. So to your point, though, one though could run off 5-6 seconds, right? Because they only have 2 plays to
Correct.
get.
So
they need about 40
play.
yards to make it a reasonable field goal / Hail Mary attempt. So one holding, and then you hope they don't complete it to somebody else, is a good call, but you can't do it on each play. I wanted to say that. And jumping back to the kickoff quickly, your options are kick it through the end zone, give it to them at the 25, squib kick, which I don't think is a good move. I agree with what you said, because if it's not perfect, you're going to give up field position. And remember, the rules now with the kickoff are once the receiving team gets the ball, they can give themselves up, right? They can take a knee.
Correct.
So if the squib kick only goes to the 40, the guy catches it, takes a knee, 1 second
disaster.
goes off,
Yeah.
and now you've given up another 15 yards of field position, right? So the other option is if you trust your special teams, you kick it to the 5, or the 4, but short of the end zone, and you make them return it. Now, if Tyreek Hill's back there, that gets scary. But remember, that could run off 5-6 seconds. And if your special teams does its job, then the task for the Chiefs becomes that much more difficult.
That requires a lot of execution. You got to get it to the 5. If it goes into the end zone, it becomes the same as the touchback. If it goes to the
so what?
If it goes to the 12 instead of the 5, because you don't time it perfectly, and then you get the ball, and then maybe you get 25 yards. Listen, this conversation is ridiculous. With 13 seconds left, they had the ball at their own 25-yard line, and they still managed to kick a fucking normal field goal. They dropped the ball on defense.
They were guarding the boundaries, right?
Or fire the head coach, so be it. It is what it is.
Yeah.
What pissed me off about that game as a Bills fan, and I'm not crying because of the bad beat I took on the Bills. That was far from a bad beat. I've lost 10, 15 games in my lifetime, way uglier than that, for $25,000 plus. I'm pissed off as a fan of the Bills, as somebody that lives in the Buffalo area. Josh Allen not touching a ball in overtime sucks. It's a technical rule, the coin toss. And I want all our listeners to know that the minute the Chiefs, more importantly, the listeners can pay attention. Roger Goodell and the NFL have to understand that the minute the Chiefs won the coin toss, you could bet them to win the game at 61%. That was their win rate at Bet365, netting out juice. Home field advantage in the NFL makes you 55% to win. So Roger Goodell's NFL, which is king of the world, has created an environment where winning home field advantage in a game only makes you 55% to win. Winning a goddamn coin flip makes you 61%. That's not cool. That's not how NFL playoff games should be decided. Figure out a better rule. And there's a lot of people out there coming up with a lot of different strategies and a lot of different ideas. But if winning a coin toss is worth 2 times home field advantage, you got to ditch the current system, period.
Yeah, the problem with, like, I've heard play a full quarter, which I actually like play a quarter with fourth quarter timing rules. And if it's tied at the end, okay, then go to the coin toss, next score wins, because you can't.
You're going to have the same problem.
I know, but Harley, you can't keep playing football. Like, you can't keep playing.
So do it the way college does it. College does it fairly.
Yeah, it's a little gimmicky. I don't know if I like that in the NFL, but let's leave that conversation for another day, because people want to hear our thoughts on Championship Sunday, I'm sure. And because we can go back and forth on the overtime rules and come up with our own suggestions, and maybe we will. in leading into the next NFL season, or maybe a little bit next week, who knows. But now let's talk about championship weekend, the best Sunday of the football year. We'll start with the early game, 3 o'clock kickoff with the traditional championship Sunday. Well, traditional, I guess now it's going back at least 10 years with a 3 Eastern and a 6:30 Eastern kickoff on championship Sunday. The AFC game, sure most of you know, it's the 12-7 Cincinnati Bengals at the 13-5 Kansas City Chiefs. The line opened 7, and I've been watching it all week, Harley, and overnight it went to 7.5. Pretty much everywhere now. The Chiefs are favored by 7.5. The total has sort of held steady at 54.5. Just a little background here. The teams actually played 4 weeks ago. I don't know if you remember that. Really good game at Cincy. Bengals were down 14-0 early and ended up winning on, guess what? A last play field goal. And Joe Burrow coming off over 500 yards passing the week before when they drilled the Steelers. 30 of 39, 446 yards, 4 touchdowns. Ended the Chiefs' 7 or 8 game win streak at the time, and their defense had been lights out, right, in the 7 or 8 game win streak, talking about the Chiefs, and the Bengals just lit them up. I will add, talking about what I've been saying every week now, both playoff games with the Bengals, they struggle to protect Burrow. He was only sacked 4 times in that game, but 4 times in an NFL game is generally a lot. Most teams would take that. So I've given you a little background. I've given you the spread and the total. Your thoughts?
We have written on the screen that we're going to discuss parlays. And I want to talk about what a parlay is. And there's a correlated parlay in this game I love. Parlays are basically bet builders. It's anytime you bet at least 2 sporting events and they both or all have to occur. The odds multiply, so the payouts are great if they win. The problem is, and we'll get into parlays and details later, every single bet you make charges VIG. So the VIG multiplies, the hold percentage multiplies. And Las Vegas actually just released numbers that they only paid out 68 cents or 68% on every dollar bet on their parlay cards. 17% profit margins in New Jersey for parlays, only 3% margin betting the NFL straight up. So I would highly recommend avoiding these parlays. We can get into them later. However, if and when you can find correlated parlays where one event helps determine the other event, bet it. And that goes on in this game. Take the Bengals plus 7.5 points and under 54.5 points. The less points scored, the more the 7 is worth. An extreme example. If only 6 points are scored in this game, and I am not predicting that the final score is going to be 6-0, you automatically win your parlay. On the other hand, if I told you right now 70 points are scored in this game, you don't like your chances with the Bengals and the plus 7. You're expecting a final score, something like 42-28, which is very likely to go in Kansas City's favor. The more points scored, the more likely the favorite or the superior team scores them. So you parlay the underdogs with the under. Whenever one bet helps another, it's a correlated parlay, and it's a great spot. I love this under.
You love the under? You like the under this week in this game?
I love the under this week. Didn't we just all watch Mahomes look unstoppable?
Yep.
Who in their right minds is going up to a betting cage and saying, I'm betting under. I'm shorting the Chiefs. As Lastman would say in those commercials, nobody. There's no one. Who's lining up to bet it? If everybody's betting the over, you zag and you bet the under and you fade the public. And then you imagine, how is this under going to happen in this game? Most likely it's going to occur with Cincinnati running the ball, playing some ball control with Mixon, keeping it close and covering the 7 points. Something like 24-20 KC win, where Mahomes still looks good. KC's in the ball game and has nothing to be embarrassed about. And if you look at a final score like 24-20, it's way under the 54.5, and it still seems like a pretty high-scoring, solid game. The Bengals did well. The Chiefs are going to the Super Bowl. You add it all up, and that's my play for this game.
So your one solid play on this game is under, correct? Under
with
54 and a
with the
half.
Bengals. No, I'm parlaying.
You are
the
parlaying
Bengals
it.
plus 7.5 with under 54.5. You're going to get paid 3.6 times your money.
Okay. And I want to talk about that. So that's a 2-game parlay that'll pay about 3.6 to 1. And again, the key with parlays, right, is you have to hit both legs. Well, on a 2-gamer, if you push one leg, what
You
happens
go
on a
back and you
2-gamer?
get paid like a straight bet. So
A straight bet. Right.
For example, if you would have done this 4 days ago when the Bengals were plus 7 and the over-under was 54, and the final score in this game would have been KC 21, Cincinnati 14. Clearly, the 35 goes under and you win that. The Bengals lost the game by 7 points. That bet is considered a push. And then you would get your standard 191. So if you bet $100, you would have gotten back $191 for $91 of profit. They would have pushed the game, pushed the Bengals like it doesn't happen. You ignore it, and then it becomes a straight bet on the under.
Let's stay on the parlay thing for just a minute before we get to the other game, and I may or may not give a pick on this one. 3.6 to 1 is the payoff for a 2-game parlay. Traditionally, right, that's based on point spread totals, like with minus 110 lines, right, on the
Correct.
individual bet. Now you're pairing them together. A 3-game parlay traditionally pays under that same scenario, I think 5.7 to 1.
Mm-hmm.
The books have a huge edge, right? You're the numbers guy. A 2-game parlay, what should it pay? Not what the books are giving you, because they have to make money. What are the actual numbers? Are you getting out your calculator?
I got the calculator because I'm going to tell you to the point. Exactly. So,
and because you talk while you're doing that, you talked about the profit margins that the books are making on parlays. It's extravagant. And so the point we're trying to make is, generally, we're not recommending you play parlays because the odds are clearly in the book's favor.
Correct. So basically, if you want to run the math, you're getting back 3.65 on every $100 wagered on a 2-team parlay. You should be getting back 4. So you're basically giving them just over 8 cents, 9 cents. Remember, you're giving them 5 cents on a single bet, 5%. You're giving them 9% on a 2-team parlay, and you're giving them 13% on a 3-team parlay. On a 3-team parlay, they're giving you back $7 for every dollar you wager, and they should be giving you back $8. And like I said, it keeps multiplying from there. I'm just reading you the numbers now, and we can discuss it later, but uncorrelated parlays are a disaster. New Jersey posted their figures. They made $700 million last year on betting for a 7% margin. But their margin was only 3.6% on football, 3.2% on basketball, and 4.1% on baseball. But they made 17.5% on parlays. It's even worse than that. Guys like me are betting correlated parlays and having an edge. The stiffs out there who bet parlays are giving up more than 20% margin. So if you bet $100 a week on a bunch of parlays, on average, you're getting back 80 cents. Just light a $20 bill on fire. And again, I'm not knocking you. If you've got a lot of money and you want to bet $100 a week on some crazy ass shit for fun, go for it. And I mean, it costs $20 to see a movie. And I think Ford just gave us permission to eat a little bit of popcorn in the movie. Great. Like in between bites and a mask or whatever the hell his stupid rules are. But know that it's entertainment value, because if you're not betting correlated parlays, you're pissing away money.
All right. And we'll come back and add a little bit more about parlays, which is our betting concept of the week. The late game, the NFC Championship, features the 12-7 San Francisco 49ers at Los Angeles, where the Super Bowl will be in a couple weeks, taking on the 14-5 Rams. It's a 6:30 Eastern kickoff. Now, we've seen a move in the line here as well, Harley. This game opened pretty much 3 across the board with the Rams favored, total 46. Overnight, it moved to 3.5. The Rams are now favored by 3.5. excuse me. And when we say the lines move, generally what that means is there's more money on one side to move the line. And that's what's occurred here. Now, remember, quick backstory on this matchup. These are division foes. They've already played twice this year, and they played as recently as 3 weeks ago, final week of the regular season. Niners came back from a 17-0 early first quarter deficit. They were still down 17-3 at the half, and they ended up winning 27-24 in overtime to book their ticket to the playoffs. And the Niners also won on a Monday night in week 10, 31-10 in San Fran. That they won that one handily. But that was sort of the middle point of the season where the Rams were really struggling. That was their down period this year. So there's the background info. Over to you.
Jorey, you left out the most important stat about their last game, and that's that the Rams were a 4.5-point favorite against the Niners. That game was way more important to San Francisco than it was to the Rams.
Yes,
that was a make or break the playoffs. And the bookmakers still made the Rams a 4.5-point favorite because we know, the Rams are a vastly superior team. This line is short at 3.5. It's not often that I bet a favorite. I am taking the Rams minus 3.5 this week. I think it's a great bet. The Rams have a way better quarterback. Again, Stafford is better than Garoppolo. The Rams, the receivers are better for the Rams. The Rams have stud receivers. In an NFL pass-happy league, if you've got a better quarterback and better receivers, you're in good shape. You also have a ridiculously talented defensive line. What Donald and Miller and company are going to do to Garoppolo is going to make kind of Burrow on his ass maybe look like a joke. I think Garoppolo is going to look like a frightened child at times this week. He's going to be forced into mistakes. He's going to be incredibly uncomfortable. Again, I almost never bet the favorite. But when you're getting a vastly superior, well-rounded team versus a team that's going to rely on special teams and gimmicky plays, and this has to work and that has to work, and then maybe we'll pull it out kind of thing. I'm sorry. The Rams minus 3.5. Book it to the Super Bowl hosting it.
I can't argue with what you just said. I also like the Rams. I'm a little bit on the fence on the early game. In fact, leaning a little bit Bengals, even though I know KC's the better team. And like I said last week in talking about the Bengals, like if you got to protect your quarterback better. But I agree with you. I think the Rams are the better team. I think the only reason, they beat up the Bucs last week. They physically dominated that game, and those sloppy turnovers allowed the Bucs back in. Stafford's played really well in both playoff games. 6 touchdowns, no picks, high completion percentage. To your point, way more balance at wide receiver. Like Cooper Kupp, he made the two, right? He had the 2 big plays on the last drive that got him the winning field goal. But in the wild card game, and for most of that game, he had the big play early, right? He hasn't been as much of a factor. Odell has become a big part of the offense. Getting Akers back at running back has been a huge addition. They have a really good tight end in Higbee, although that's kind of sawed off because Kittle's a really, really good player. And he made some plays last week after, I think, having only 1 catch in the wild card win over Dallas. But to me, because it's always hard to handicap turnovers, if the Rams and Stafford in particular play relatively clean, I don't see how they lose this game, frankly.
It's the NFL. They'll find a way to do it, and then we'll say with hindsight, we should have figured it out. But the Rams seem to be the play here. I think the Rams would have been a 6+ point favorite in this game had their game against Tampa just finished at the end of the half or 3 quarters with them winning 27-10. So why on earth a couple of late fumbles should move the line 2 points is beyond me. It's largely just noise. And
I will add,
Yeah,
I'm with you on the Rams. I will add this. The one concern I have about the Rams, and it reared its ugly head in the Tampa game. It also did in that loss, right, 3 weeks ago when the Rams blew a big lead. Their defense, for whatever reason, in the fourth quarter has been leaky. It's just been leaky. I don't know if the pass rush gets a little bit tired, but go back and look, and they've given up a lot of fourth quarter points. And I mean, last week, if you had to be shitting your pants if you're a Rams bettor, the way things were unfolding. Say what you want about Jimmy G, he is a winner, at least with this team. I think his record as a starter is like 35-16, right? They were in the Super Bowl 2 years ago. And what Jimmy G has shown is no matter what happens for 3 quarters, when the game's on the line, he seems to make plays. Having said all that, I'm still with you on the Rams, but that's my one concern is late in the game, can the Rams defense put it all together? So let's jump back into parlays for a minute. You talked about like the one thing I will say about parlays, and you alluded to it earlier, is that you should be looking them as a source of pure fun, almost as a lottery ticket, if you will, especially if you're going to play like those, 7, 8, 9, 10 game parlays, right? Where you're just stringing together a bunch of games. Along those lines, if you are going to do it, I would recommend, and I'm sure you would agree, low dollar amounts, right? Because it is essentially a lottery ticket.
If you're doing things for fun, literally all bets are off. Listen, I'm not on the show for my good looks or my flowing hair. I'm on the show because I'm a sharp bettor, and I'm just telling you guys where the value is and where the value isn't. I can make suggestions, and we should totally do that one time. We should have a segment or maybe a whole podcast dedicated to fun bets where we focus a lot on the in-game parlays, and we talk about the fact that you can watch a Raptor game and you can cheer and Van Vliet to go over on assists and Siakam to go over on points. I mean, there's bets they offer like the first to 10 points. You can watch the first 15 minutes of an NBA game and just get a cheap thrill over stuff like that. But if you want to bet somewhat successfully long-term, the problem with betting parlays is that eventually you're just going to want to hedge the bet, and then it makes no sense. If you bet a 14 parlay, you're getting 12-1 on your money. If you bet $100 and you stood to win $1,200, wouldn't you hedge the fourth game, meaning betting the other side? My guess is a lot of people would. So why not? Why bet and then hedge and pay double juice? Just bet a 3-teamer. And then again, if you're going to bet a 3-teamer at 6-1 for $100 and you have $600 riding on the third game, wouldn't you hedge the third game? And you probably would. So then why not make it a 2? We can discuss hedging another show and when it's right. And as you can gauge from how I'm talking, it's rarely right. Bet less if you're not comfortable with the volatility, and I understand that. And listen, I'm not talking about a guy who bet $10 on Leicester at 5,000-1 and stood to win $50,000, and he's never seen more than $1,000 in his bank account. Sure, that guy, God bless him, hedge. But if you're hedging if you are hedging bets on a weekly basis, you're giving up too much value.
Okay. And so again, we're recommending, hey, you want to have fun and play some parlays, go for it. What we haven't talked about yet is kind of the newest craze. And it is relatively new. I want to say within the last 2 years. I'd have to research it to know for certain. But I'm talking about our same game parlays, right? Where you can string together, you can bet sides, totals, general props. We've talked about proposition bets, so I hope you listened in. Player props, and you can piece them together in the same game. And I have to say, it's a really fun way to watch the game. What I want to ask you about is when you're and I should also add that just this week, I think PointsBet USA in the States was the first to announce that they're going to have same game in-game parlays. So it's in-game betting, and you can have parlays within the same game, which is kind of nuts, but also could be fun, especially, if a guy gets injured early in the game that is in one of your same game parlays, and now that parlay's out the door. You can add another, or you want to see how the game's flowing, things of that nature. Now you have the opportunity to do it in game, and a couple other books quickly followed suit. So my question to you, though, is you said if you're going to bet parlays, you should almost always bet correlated parlays. Does the same hold true for same game parlays?
Yes and no. And we got to understand, you just have to understand what's going on here. For example, when I'm betting under 54.5 in the Bengals game, and I'm betting the Bengals plus 7.5, I'm laying the standard minus 110 juice on each side of my bets, and it multiplies and I get the 3.65. I hope all our listeners understand that if you bet over Raptors 111.5 points, it correlates very, very highly with betting over Van Vliet 23.5 points. Right?
Right.
If you want to bet
so
over
so let me jump in. So you say, okay, you like Bengals plus 7.5 and under 54.5. So if you want to add legs to make it a same game parlay, what you're saying is you're liking the Bengals, you're liking the under. So now you may want to be looking at some of the chief player props or team props that go along with that line of thinking. Like maybe you're going under Holmes passing yards or under some Mahomes, of the right? Is that's what you're saying by correlating them?
100%. So what you would want to do in theory is start patching together legs of the parlay. For example, Mahomes passing yards, I think, are at 287.5.
Yeah, right around there.
I hope we all understand that if the game goes under, Mahomes is way less likely to go to 287.5 passing yards. However, with same game parlays, they take extra juice. And the reason these things didn't exist until a couple of years ago is because computers weren't sharp enough to figure out how much extra juice they're taking. So, for example, if you added Mahomes to the parlay I told you to bet, you would get the 287.5 yards, but you wouldn't be laying 110. You'd be laying 130 or 140. And then if you wanted to add under 7 receptions for Kelsey, which again works out well, they're going to change the odds. So instead of it being minus 110, it's going to be minus 160. So they know it's correlated. So now you have to figure out your correlation stats versus the book's correlation stats. Yeah. And I'll save you the suspense. For 99.9% of people out there, their computers are going to be better than yours. So when it comes to the same game parlays that most people are betting, your odds don't multiply by 1.9 or close to 2 times. They multiply at a much lower rate, especially if you're betting the correlated stuff. I want you to bet correlated parlays where they're giving you full pop. For example, the points and the under, where you're taking a dog and an under in a situation like the Bengals KC game. Same game parlays are a ton of fun, but you're going to go broke unless you bet them for a few bucks for entertainment value.
Right. That's the way I always look at those. Is it's a bit of a lottery ticket. I'm going to keep saying it because I think that's the mindset that you have to have when you're betting them. But man, it is a fun way to watch the game because especially when I like a side and a total or both, and sometimes alternative sides or totals, right? Where obviously you're laying a little more juice, but if you're really not sure about the Bengals plus 7.5, but you like them a lot more at plus 10.5, you can do that in a same game parlay. And then I like pairing those with player props that match my thought process on the game. And then you're looking, right? You're watching for these guys, and when they make a catch or drop a ball, if you've gone under. And by the way, betting under the player props is so unfulfilling. For the fun quotient, going over the player prop numbers is a lot more fun in my books.
Again, and that's why the value's on the under. The way it works,
of course it is
if you really have the balls to think that KC and Mahomes peak last week, you go under KC, you do it alt, and you go under KC 24 points, and you go under Kelsey receptions and under Mahomes yards, and you just hope Cincinnati and Mixon run the ball into the line. And every time they run the ball into the line and the clock ticks off another 35 seconds, you cheer.
Yeah, it's not as much fun, but again, as you've always said, when you're talking about totals, and I know we're only 3 shows in, but we should hammer home the point that public loves overs. So the value is always on the unders. And to wrap up our thoughts on parlays as our betting concept of the week, the point we're making is you're never getting the odds suck on parlays. So view them as pure fun and as a bit of a lottery ticket. If you're going to do it, try and make them correlated as Harley explained, and keep them to a low number like 2. Not right, even a 3-game parlays, a 3-leg parlay is a little too much. You're right. We're in agreement.
Yeah, I can live with that summary.
Okay. All right. The Aussie Open has been a part of the program for all 3 episodes, and now we're into the finals. And let's start with the ladies. Ash Barty, the home country star and the number 1 seed and the number 1 player in the world, is a massive favorite. She's the number 1 seed in the tournament. Danielle Collins is an American. She was the 27 seed. She's really solid, aggressive, feisty player. Here's how I'm going to handicap this for you, Harley, because I know you're not really going to handicap tennis. Barty is the better player. Barty has dominated this tournament. She literally hasn't even come close to losing a set. If you go look at the scores in her matches, I think she's only got 1 or 2 6-3 sets. Like, that's as close as anybody's come in a set. So she has been by far the best player. The draw opened up for a little bit when Osaka got knocked out and she didn't have to face her in the 3rd or 4th round. Osaka lost to Anisimova, and then Barty handled her pretty easily. Point I'm trying to make is that the only way Barty loses this match is if the nerves and the moment get too big for her, because she's looking to make this her 3rd slam. She's got the French, she's got Wimbledon. So she's looking to add that 3rd leg to the career Grand Slam, and she's playing at home. And it's been, I think it's been 44 years since an Australian woman has won the Australian Open. So to me, there's no value here because Barty's a minus 500 favorite, right? She's 5-1. Collins is plus 380. If I'm betting it, I would bet Collins, but for me, it's a pass. Your thoughts given such a big line on this match?
I mean, Barty's the best player in the world. The odds reflect that Barty's the best player in the world. Chances are you're going to turn it on in an hour and a bit. She's going to win the championship. And that'll be the end of it. I mean, I'm not betting that match.
No.
The men are more interesting to me.
Yeah, very much so. The only thing I will say is I think nerves might be a bit of a factor, and Barty's shown this before at times. Maybe for the match to go 3 sets at plus 225 is worth consideration. Huh?
I mean, if you have to bet something, you have to bet something. When one player is vastly superior to the other player, but you got to lay 5-1, I just think it's a pass. What I find interesting is the men's side. Medvedev was the favorite. He was a big favorite in this tournament as soon as Joki pulled out. He's cruised his way in.
I don't know about that. Felix Auger-Aliassime might have something to say about that.
The Canadians deserve a lot of credit. The Canadians took these 2 guys to 5 sets. Nobody but the Canadians did anything to either one of them. One of those 2 Canadians will win a major in the next 3 years, if not both of them. They seem phenomenal. They were close. I mean, there were some cheap plays or it would have been a
little bit of controversy from Shapo's side about extra time for Nadal and the break, because he was really struggling physically after the 4th set, right? Because Nadal won the first 2. Shapo then came back and was the better player for the next 2. Nadal was struggling with the heat. He had some stomach issues, took a bit of an extra long break between the 4th and 5th sets and got the break he needed and closed him out. So the line, Medvedev is a 2-1 favorite here. And Nadal is plus 170. Context, Medvedev going for 2 straight slams. Remember, he won the last one, the U.S. Open, ending Djokovic's Grand Slam bid back in September. Rafa is going for history here, right? The big 3 are tied at 20 Grand Slams each. Rafa with a win he'll break free and he will, or break the tie, and he'll have 21. For those wondering, Medvedev's the number 2 player in the world. Even with a win, he does not go to number 1, but he's on the verge. And if he does win, it's likely that within the next month, he will overtake Djokovic for number 1. To me, the value play here is Nadal, but personally, I think Medvedev's going to win this match. In tennis, I'll try and make this quick so we can wrap up the show within kind of the hour window that we'd like to. Matchups matter. Styles matter, right? You'll talk about that in football games, in hockey and basketball. And it's not a good matchup here for Rafa. If anybody watched the Berrettini match last night, which went late into the night, that was a good matchup for Nadal because Berrettini's backhand is weak. Rafa's a lefty, so he was going cross court all night and just peppering Berrettini's backhand. That kind of weakness doesn't exist. And Rafa is not just going to push Medvedev around from the baseline and just wear him down. And so I think Medvedev, with youth, with the confidence that he's got now, having a Grand Slam win under his belt, I think Medvedev wins this match. I just don't love laying 2-1 in a tennis match on a best of 5 with Rafa on the other side. It's tough.
I would
like if I was betting it, I'd probably bet Nadal. But for me, again, I'm passing on both matches.
If I was betting this matchup, I would for sure bet Medvedev. It's one of the rare exceptions where the favorite, if anything, is undervalued because of the name of the underdog. Nadal is very good, but he's on the verge of being in the booth with us. I mean, Felix, he had to pull the move.
I thought
Chapo,
so too.
Sorry, he had to pull the move in the 5th set. It's exhausting and it's tiring. And I mean, good for him. And he went on a great run and he's good. This isn't his best surface. He's getting older by tennis player standards. Medvedev is clearly the better player, but there's bettors out there that if they can get better than plus 150, you'll just bet Nadal for the name and the experience or whatever it is. And if Nadal pulls it off, he deserves a tremendous amount of credit, but the odds are he won't. And if anything, I mean, I think Medvedev's going to win this matchup more than 2 out of 3 times, and I think he's the bet.
Don't underestimate Nadal's heart. It's he's the one thing about him is he's not going to beat himself. You have to slay him, and you have to do it potentially over 4 or 5 hours. If I'm making a call, I think it's Medvedev in 4, but I'm a little reluctant to lay the 2-1. All right. Before we go, a couple quick things. Our gambling or sports betting story of the week is as follows. And it kind of relates a little bit to what we talked about, the Draymond Green situation, right? A couple weeks ago.
Yep.
I don't want to rehash that, but so this week, the NBA was basically forced to make a stat correction on Monday night because sports bettors made it known to the books and on social media that Monday night in the Suns Jazz game, long story short, Chris Paul was credited with an assist that should have gone to Mikal Bridges. Okay. So now the Bridges prop on assists for the game was 2.5. At the end of the game, he was credited with 5 assists. He should have had 6. Okay. So what's the big deal? Right, Harley? If his prop was 2.5 and he has 5, he's already over it. Why does it matter if he has 5 or 6? Well, guess what? It all ties together, Harley. It's all correlated. What am I talking about? Same game parlays and the alternative numbers. There were tickets out there that people had Mikal Bridges over 5.5 assists tied to their same game parlays. And so the NBA actually went back, looked at the video. Sure enough, Bridges should have got the assist, and they made the correction. And the point of, and it actually happened a week ago, interestingly enough, with Chris Paul, where he was awarded a rebound that should have gone to Jay Crowder. The difference there was the prop was for Crowder rebounds was 3.5. and he ended up with 3, and they ended up making the correction. Why is this important? Well, first of all, the books ended up having to pay out those tickets that I was talking about on the Bridges alternative same game parlay prop. The books ended up paying winners on, I think, well, the losers became winners, whoever had that alternative prop bet for Bridges. And on the other one with Crowder, they had to make the adjustment as well, and the books had to pony up. And a lot of the time, the books, things are changing, right? They have rules that once the game's gone final and the stats posted, that's it. That's changing. And it goes to what we talked about with the Draymond Green situation, where these leagues, they've got to be paying very close attention to all the stats, every single stat on every single game with players and everybody else.
There's third-party consulting companies that charge a bloody fortune to the teams and the leagues to record their data and stats in real time, and they got to get it right. That's who the leagues are paying. That's who the teams are paying. That's who the books are paying, and everybody's reliant upon it. The books might not want to hear this, but I think the books realize at this point in time, or I hope they realize, if this happens, you pay the consumers both ways. If you initially thought you want to bet, don't take away my money because somebody else pointed out you made a mistake. That's heartbreaking, and that's in bad faith. You're the bookmaker. You're the profitable guy. I'm the consumer. I get paid. Now, if me or anybody else figures out that you made a mistake and then we correct it, you also pay. So books pay both sides. Work it into your agreement with the leagues and the rights. If the leagues want to pay or you got to pay the leagues, have them figure out the stats properly. Third-party consulting companies, and I don't want to put Sport Radar under the rails. I'm not blaming them. They're just the biggest of the third-party data companies. If you are charging teams and leagues a fortune for your information, make sure it's right. Or maybe you're the one that's liable. All I know is the NBA and the teams and the sports books and the sports radars of this world have to sit down and figure it out because they should be the ones liable if there's a mistake. Don't take from one consumer to pay the other. That's not how this works. Consumers should get paid across the board, and the big boys, pick up your big boy pants and figure out who's paying for the mistakes.
Couldn't agree more. And again, whoever, if it's the leagues or they're outsourcing it, the stats are more important than ever because of how much wagering is going on in sports. And it's only growing, right? As states get added in the US, provinces come on board in Canada, hopefully sometime soon in the very near future. And we'll keep monitoring that. But you got to get these stats right because now there's a lot of money riding on it, as well as credibility. And interestingly, this all ties in to our question of the week. And remember, we want your questions you can email us questions@theparlay.com. You can send it to either one of us, prefer both on Twitter @Jorey Middle, @Sharp Edge Picks for Harley. And the question of the week, Sorrel, I got to take my glasses off to read it here, comes to us from, hopefully I'm pronouncing this right, Tasala, who writes, "Hi, Harley and Jorey, big fan." Thanks, I didn't have to read that part. But, wondering if you could talk about sports books. Besides making sure it's legal wherever you are, what else should bettors be looking for when deciding what sports book to go with for a bet? Is it just about which may have a bigger return, or is there more of a method to the madness? Thanks a bunch. So that's an interesting question, and it's one that's a little bit difficult to answer right now here in Canada because you can only bet with one book legally, at least in Ontario where we are, right? But the bigger return, I think she's talking about the lines, right? How the different books will set the lines, right? And the juice. What I'm talking about is the juice, the vig.
Yeah.
So I'll let you handle this one.
So there's a couple different aspects to this question. For starters, when you're talking about books, I mean, in an ideal world, we talked about this, you have multiple accounts with multiple sports books, so you can line shop. So if there's a bunch of 7s and a couple 7.5s on the Bengals, you take the Bengals plus 7.5.
But how many people are going to set up multiple accounts and multiple books?
Well, if you want to
right? Like
make money, if you want to make money betting sports, you better do it. If you want to be a casual fan and then you're just asking,
right.
what sports book should I find? My
Yes.
order would be the following. For starters, ensure you get paid when you win. Reputable consumer protection is the key. Some of the European books do not like paying winners, and if you find a way to beat them in a way they deem cheap, they will deny you payment, kick you off the site, and not pay you. So that's not ideal. And these books are, by the way, licensed in most jurisdictions in the world. So that's not ideal. Less VIG is obviously better than more VIG. So Pinnacle Sports traditionally charged minus 104 on NFL sides, and most places charge minus 110. You might as well pay less juice, much better than paying more juice, since most places don't offer anything other than the standard stuff. If you really like a certain sport, make sure they spread it at your book, ideally when you like to bet. So, for example, Bet365 comes out with NHL lines the night before, and some of those lines are softer because people haven't bet into them and made them efficient. So if you love betting the NHL or you like to bet it early and lock in odds the night before for whatever reason, make sure you're aligned with a sports book that does that for you. We can cover in-play in depth. It's almost 50% of the sportsbook business now. Yeah. That's betting during the games. We should talk about some angles there. Some operators have a great in-play product. PointsBet, I think, just advertised that they're going in-play straight throughout the game. Bet365 offers a lot, but they charge a lot of juice. Again, if in-play is what you really like to bet, make sure you can do it. And again, good old-fashioned convenience. So Play OLG's got a website running right now in Ontario. For the first 2 months, you couldn't load money on CIBC cards. You could in the gray market Bet365 site. They only could do it with Royal and Scotia. Don't ask me why they launched without an arrangement with all 5 Schedule A's. When you go on their site, you usually see the money line first, not the point spread. It's not as user-friendly as I'd like to see. With time, obviously, you want to place a bet, and if you're placing a bet when your day job is not sports betting, which I'm assuming it's not for most people listening, you want convenience, so you can place a bet quickly during your coffee break without being frustrated. So user-friendliness, good customer service, good bonuses, all factor into the decision.
Yeah, and if you like, to your point, if you're just casual and you don't really care and you're not going to spend the time, you just want the convenience, just find one that looks nice to you in terms of if it's user friendly or not. Try to at least look at the juice, right? Because there are some books that will have, they won't even have minus 110 lines. It's rare now, but you get the idea. Mm-hmm. And if you want to spend a little more time, especially like I said, right now there's no options in Ontario, but once everybody comes on board and is licensed and operating, shop around. Take a little bit of time, do a little research. And that goes pretty much with everything in this world. Shop around, find the value, or find just what works for you if it's not all that important and you're purely doing it for fun and convenience. Thanks so much for the question. Again, we want your questions. If they're good enough, we deem them worthy, we will address them on the show. Harley, just quick recap of your picks on Championship Sunday for those who may have missed them earlier and are tuning in late or fast forwarded or whatever they did. Listen to this podcast on both games. Tell us who you like again.
So my big bet is on the Rams minus 3.5. You could listen to the show for another 3 months and probably not hear me like a favorite the way I do the Rams.
Yeah.
And then
this is a rare occurrence. There should be like balloons and shit happening because it's not going to happen often.
And parlay the Bengals plus 7.5 and under 54.5. Again, you get standard VIG on something that is highly correlated and there's good value in it. It's a long shot because you need both legs to come in, but I like the play.
Next week, we are going to address bankroll management, how to manage your money, which is hugely important as you dive into the sports betting world, especially for newbies, which is one of the targets we have for this podcast, is to educate those who are going to jump into the sports betting market. So you're going to want to tune in for that. And the Olympics are going to be on the verge of beginning when we talk to you next Friday. So we're going to talk about how to bet the Olympics, and I can't wait to hear Harley handicap luge and unibob, as well as cross-country skiing. You're ready for that, right?
I will give a couple value bets on the Olympics. I probably won't touch those sports. Just quickly as we wrap up, Andrew Willis wrote a scathing article in the Globe and Mail against Great Canadian Gaming, who went out against all the private operators coming, pointing out that Great Canadian is one, not even Canadian, owned by a private equity shop out of New York, and two, incredibly self-serving. They run the largest brick and mortar casino operations in Ontario. So they do not want to see private operators. They do not care about job losses or whatever, blah, 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 that they babbled about. Hopefully Ford doesn't get intimidated by Great Canadian, understands the consulting reports written by them were written for them, and gets private operators up and running, protecting the consumers, giving us choices of where to bet sooner rather than later.
All right, that's going to do it. I'd love to chime in, but we got to run. And so for Harley, I'm Jorey. May all your picks be winners. Ours too. We'll talk to you next week. This is the Parleh Sports Betting Show on Canada's Sports Betting Network, the Parlay.